Welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch, and we thank our sponsor, Massa's Restaurants, 5 locations in St. Louis, stlmasses.com. I'll be talking about them in a little bit. But a man who needs no introduction to St. Louis sports fans, I'm excited today. I think the last time I talked to Kevin Slaten was 1993. That's a long time, Kevin.
That's a long time ago. You're making us feel old.
I blame myself. I don't know where I've been or where you've been. I never called, but I would love for at some point you to say, "Turn him down."
Turn him down.
Carpe diem to you as well. Seize the day. So tell us a little bit. I know right now you're on 1190 in the mornings, and you do some sports, but you're doing some other talk over there. They kind of have a different format, so just kind of let people know what you've been up to of late on 1190 a.m.
Yeah, I do the morning drive time show, 7 to 9, at 1190. It's 1190 The Patriot, and our 2 hours are a mix of sports and politics, and we stir it up, we have fun. It's pretty much the same edge as it always has been when it was just sports, but I just wanted to do more, and so we created a different kind of a show, and now we've been doing it for over 2 years at 1190, and we're having a lot of fun.
It feels like a perfect format and a perfect time for you because, I don't know, people seem to have some opinions about what's going on in the world, and I think you have a few as well, right?
I certainly do, and that's why I enjoy doing it, because so few people in any form of media are looking at the way things are honestly and giving credit where credit's due, which is to the president, President Trump. And unfortunately, in our society today, the mainstream media is 90, 95, maybe 100% liberal, and it's not supposed to be that way. It didn't matter in the old days when Walter Cronkite was doing the news, or Humphrey Brinkley and those type, Peter Jennings. They were all liberal, but you never knew it. And they simply gave you the news. But today, it's an agenda-driven media. It's an agenda-driven left-wing lunatic media. And so it's a lot of fun to be on the other side and take them on.
Yeah, I listen to a lot. I'm basically 100% podcast, so I need you to podcast this thing a little more, figure out a way. I've been looking for it forever because I do get sick of listening to the same podcast over and over. I need to find you more. I don't get up as early in the morning as you are on the radio. That's the problem.
Well, you can listen to our podcast Slaten to TK. That's where we have it, and so it's available probably just a couple hours after we're off the air.
I will look forward for that because I had been looking for it, but I think that's why I called that. I have nothing else to ask now. Just kidding. But I was thinking about when I started thinking about talking to you, because like I said, it had been a while. I started a cable access show in 1993. I was 16, and you had just kind of started doing sports radio, and I was like, man, I like what Kevin's doing, because before you came on, it was pretty much KMOX and, hello, we'll take your calls, call in, and 436-7900, and they'd take your call and they'd move on. And you would come on and you'd complain about Joe Torre and why is Ozzie Smith still playing. And I said, God, this is interesting because this is something I've never heard, and I kind of want to get into that. And I don't think I ever got, obviously, the reps that you got, but just tell me a little bit about those early days of sports radio in St. Louis and kind of developing that style of kind of taking on the man where, there was no criticism like that happening in the early 90s.
Well, it was even before that when I first started doing it, but it was very simply seeing what you see and then commenting honestly on it. With Ozzie Smith, I actually wanted Ozzie Smith to be playing. I was that business with LaRussa was disgraceful, the way he treated Ozzie Smith. Joe Torre was a guy who couldn't manage worth a damn unless you gave him the best team in baseball. He gets in the Hall of Fame because he had the best players that George Steinbrenner could put around him. And then my way of thinking is, any idiot could have won with those Yankees. He couldn't win with the Cardinals. He got one round of the playoffs when he was with the Braves. He couldn't win with the Mets. He only won big with the Yankees. And so when he was here, there was plenty to gripe about because of the way the team was losing, and the Cardinals wouldn't spend any money. And those were truths. And so I commented on them with regularity, and that was different in this town. It as far as taking on the establishment, I had no problem with that because when they're wrong, they're wrong. But they were used to getting treated with kid gloves, and in fact, for the most part, still are. But there was a rebellion against my style from the people who ran the sports organizations. Sometimes it was the coaches, sometimes it was the management. But very few of them enjoyed my show. Mark Lamping was one of them. But the rest of them pretty much thought, well, who's this guy? And he's really upsetting the apple cart here.
You bring up Tony, and I always enjoyed your take on Tony because I do think he's a pretty good manager, but I do think the difference is, and I believe this to this day, once he left, it really did change the dynamic of the team because now Mozeliak pretty much has carte blanche. Tony was the reason why they would, he literally would just sit, or he'd play a Joe Thurston every night until he got Matt Holliday, or he got Jim Edmonds, or who he wanted to run the team. He wanted a lot more authority than what Mo probably wanted to have with him. But I think there was a lot of obviously interesting decisions he made, and I think you hammered him. It was pretty fun, but it is different now, right? Do you feel like maybe you need a Tony, even if you get kind of upset with the way he runs a team, you need some sort of checks and balances in the managerial role because it feels like baseball doesn't have it anymore.
Well, I don't. The way the Cardinals were structured, once Mozeliak left, LaRussa wanted to be the guy in charge, but Mozeliak still had control over acquisitions of players. But LaRussa had control over who would play. And so you're right. If he wanted to acquire somebody and Mozeliak wouldn't do it, he'd play bums just to prove his point. My problem with LaRussa were twofold. I think he's a rotten person, and I don't think he's a good manager. I think in baseball, as Mitch Williams once told me, an 11-year-old can run a baseball team. And there are some famous quotes out there from a lot of managers, one of which was Billy Martin. He said the secret to managing a baseball team successfully, you've got 25 guys, 10 hate you, 10 love you, 5 are undecided. The secret to winning is keeping the 5 undecided away from the 10 who hate you. And I think there's a lot of truth to that as well. There's not a lot of strategy that LaRussa ever employed. When Whitey Herzog was here, he could manage circles around somebody like LaRussa. And it was Whitey who pretty much famously said that managers should only be responsible for about 10 games a year where he makes a difference. Otherwise, just write your lineup in and let him go. And that's where LaRussa and I we parted the Red Sea. He was a micromanager who had to have control of every pitch, every play, and never did anything in terms of aggressive baseball. He loved to sit back and wait for the home run. That was the game that he wanted to manage. So those are the kind of players he wanted to get. And when he kept claiming that he preached this hard 9, the Cardinal way, it was just a phony. Yadier Molina and Albert Pujols never hustled. They still don't. And they get away with it. So this kind of business is the Cardinal way, if you want the truth about it, and I told the truth about it, the Cardinal way is if you're one of his favorites, you don't have to hustle. And that's what got Scott Rolen out of here, because he crossed Pujols, and LaRussa sided with Pujols.
I think also the fun, as you talk, it is fun because it makes me think. And his famous Beanball Wars. Oh, hey, well, you could throw it, guys. You just can't throw, up, or that. He seemed like he wanted to control the game as if people make fun of Joe Madden a little bit in this town, but Tony was the king of that. Where we can throw it, guys, but we know how to do it. We're good at it.
Well, he thought he ran everybody's team. And he was going to lecture you on where you could throw at a guy or where you could not throw at a guy. And the rest of the team said, F you. And I don't know who he thought he was, but he managed some of the dirtiest players I've ever seen. Chris Duncan was one of the dirtiest players out there. So was Holliday. Both of them injured players sliding over the base at second base. And so Scudero was the guy that Holliday got for the Giants in the playoffs. And Jimmy Rollins was the one that Duncan took on. And both teams resented it and both retaliated. And LaRussa made a big deal out of it. Same way with the infamous Molina-Brandon Phillips skirmish that Molina started, and then LaRussa and Dusty Baker got into it. Of course, LaRussa made sure he didn't get too close to Dusty Baker. And Holliday went after Chris Carpenter in the middle of that melee. People forget about that. I'm sorry, Scott Rowland went after Chris Carpenter. And Chris Carpenter's lucky Rowland didn't catch up to him. because Rowe looked like a raging bull at that point after the Cardinals had started this. But LaRussa thought he could control every team, and other managers said, I don't know who you think you are now. There are some who sucked up to him, like Joe Madden. But others said, like Bruce Bochy, hey, this is my team. We play the way we want to.
And you famously sort of got under his craw with some Dave Duncan talk. And I thought you had him on a few times too. But it just was a funny thing to me that he would get so worked up over something Bernie Miklasz would write, or the Post-Dispatch would put something out about the Cubs, and I'm not talking to you. But you did have contact with him, right? I mean, until the end when I guess the Dave Duncan thing was.
I've never saw him a few times, but at the point where he just as long as you were complimentary of him, he was fine being on. But once you started to question him, then he wanted no part of taking part in any kind of an interview. And so I just stopped having him. And then the Duncan issue reared its ugly head because of a producer not telling Duncan that he was going to be on the air, and Duncan claiming he was never told. But I told him right before the interview started, so I know he was told. It's on the tape. But they wanted to make a big issue out of that, and so I really didn't care to have Duncan or LaRussa on anyway anymore, because they would never give me anything. So I'm not one that interviews many players because they're bad. They've got nothing to offer. I think if I'm a part of the audience listening, I'm thinking, this guy, get him off. I mean, they're not skilled at doing an interview. Most of them don't have a personality. Their talent is playing baseball or playing hockey or basketball. It's not speaking. And so I think it bores the audience.
Now, my favorite thing about your show is when you have callers, because I think callers think, I'm going to call Kevin and I'm going to let him have it. And then you're very good at making sure that you've won the argument at the end. And I think you enjoy it. It seems to me like you enjoy when callers want to call in. Tell me a little bit about that style of just letting callers come in and then just sort of kind of dig themselves into a grave. And then they're like, all right, Kevin, carpe diem.
Yeah. Well, it's not hard because most people that want to take you on don't really know what they're talking about. And so it's pretty simple. When as I've always preached to people, if you call here, have a point. 3 simple words, have a point. If you don't have a point, it's easy to destroy you. And the easiest way to win the debate, if a caller says 10 things and 9 of them are right, you go after the one that's wrong. And you leave the other 9 alone. That doesn't happen too often, but that's how you would attack it. And so they can't. It's a position they can't defend. I know they can't defend it because the facts are against them. So unless you have the facts in your favor, your point is worthless. And most people are intellectually lazy and don't present themselves well with researching facts. And so when they go and get all hyped up and want to tell you where to go, calling me a name without any substance to it is sort of juvenile.
We talked a little bit about the Cardinals before, so I think I've seen you have some sort of loose feelings on the new manager. Just tell me a little bit about what you think of the Cardinals in 2019 and the way they're going about it. It's very early. Well, I haven't even played yet.
I think they took the cheap route again. And I think when they hired Matheny, they took the cheap route. And so they haven't paid a manager much money since LaRussa. And the results are pretty obvious. They had some good players when Matheny first started out, but his management was atrocious. And Mike Filt, he continued to lose a career coach. He now has dug himself a hole by claiming that the Cardinals have 5 number 1 pitchers, number 1 starters. Now, that's probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard come out of a manager's mouth, and I've heard a lot of dumb things. But that's the dumbest, because he has now set himself up to fail. If he doesn't win the World Series, he should be fired. If you don't win the World Series with 5 number 1 starters, then you're a terrible manager. And if you do win, now I would say, well, you should have. You have 5 number 1 starters. So he set himself up to fail. Of course, he doesn't have 5 number 1 starters. He doesn't even have 1. And so he put himself in a hole. All this ass-kissing of the players makes a manager look like a buffoon. Madden tried that in Chicago, and they're sick of him. So it's just simply go out and manage, learn how to do interviews, quit making stupid comments, and I think a manager would do just fine. There are plenty of them who do it that way and succeed. Bruce Bochy, for instance, now he's retiring after this season, but you've got guys out there who know what they're doing. You just don't hear a lot about them because they don't run their mouths, like LaRussa, like Mike Schilt did, who hasn't accomplished a damn thing. 5 number 1 starters. Who?
Wait.
So
Kevin,
I think it's hilarious.
Let me
and I look at the team, and I see the improvement with Goldschmidt, but I don't see it improved anywhere else.
Well, I want to interject, Kevin. I mean, you don't think Michael Wacha is as good as Max Scherzer, and you don't think that Carlos Martinez is as good as Clayton Kershaw? I mean, I have to just...
No, I do not.
I mean,
I do not.
No.
The best Cardinal starter is probably number 3 on any other team, just about.
Yeah, I don't, obviously they're not you're right. I don't think they have number 1s. I just don't understand when this is the rotation you started with in 2018 and you couldn't get to June 1st with 3 of these guys. Why you think you could try and roll this out again? That's my only thing, and I know they'll tell you, oh, well, we've got all this depth. But why on April 1st are you still screwing around with who's going to be the closer like they did last year, which I'm sure they'll probably do this year? It seems like they can't name a closer. They're just going to throw these guys, oh, well, we've got 10 guys, and we'll let them battle it out. And it just that's what bothers me is and I know it's a different game, but in 2004, 2005, 2006, we weren't going, well, we'll just see if this works, and then we'll fix it in June. They were ready on April 1st to play. I don't understand. I guess they've won twice by coming through the wild card and coming from behind, and I just get the sense that they just feel like, well, that's the way the game is played now, and I just disagree with it a little bit.
Well, I don't know how they think, because they make those kinds of statements. It shows clearly they're not thinking. And I look at this team, as I said, with an improvement from Goldschmidt, but nothing else. They don't have a lot of depth. That's proven. They have a lot of young arms, but we don't know what they can do as starters in the major leagues. Most of them haven't started a major league game. So what are they going to do? Because we know the injuries will come to Wacha. We know Martinez is already hurt. We know he's a head case on top of that. We know more than likely Wainwright won't get past 2 starts, and he'll be hurt. I mean, so now 60% of your rotation is going to be gone, disabled, or taking time off because they can't get through till Flag Day.
Yeah, it's a lot of hope and praying. We brought it up a little earlier, but just how when sports radio started, people seemed to laugh at it, like, who's going to listen to sports all day? And now, XM is basically, that is how they've made their money, is by having 55 sports channels, and FM radio has 2 or 3 sports channels in big cities. Tell me about those early days, though, when people, weren't thinking this was going to work. And like I said early on, I feel like your show was so different that it helped carry it through those early days, because you were on during the day from 3 to 7, just literally ripping down Fred Ebenezer Kuhlman and the Post Disgrace. I mean, I just remember all the things you used to say. Tell me about those early days, though, just kind of creating that format and the way it literally exploded basically, 10 years ago.
Well, Rich Gray, it's been over 20 years or so. Rich Gray was a guy who had the vision as the general manager. At the time, it was KASP, All Sports ASP, and it was 1380 AM. And that was the debut of sports talk radio in this town, other than what Tim Rex with their open line format had done. But this was the first all-day, all-sports show. And there was a combination of some syndication and some local shows, but it was mostly local shows. And it worked. Now, I think it worked mostly because our show was so different. You can't have the same types of shows on all day long. People will definitely get tired of that. You can't tell most guys from the next guy because they don't have anything unique about what they do. You can put, for instance, Bernie Miklasz, you can put any idiot on there to recite statistics all day. It's boring, it's dull, and it's not unique. As Howard Cosell once told me, find the void and fill it. And when you find the void and fill it, you have really made your show stand out, and it's unique. And that's what we've done. We've never been afraid to tell the truth. That's what the show is based on. Whether that truth infuriates people or not, it doesn't matter. And sports fans have these great emotions that guide them, whether the facts support them or not. So that's what creates a firestorm sometimes, because the fans are as bad as the players or management. They hate hearing their team talked about in any kind of a negative way. They hate hearing that their team is not the greatest team in America. And if you say it isn't, they don't like you. It's fun. I've never been afraid to be the bad guy. It doesn't bother me a bit, as long as I'm telling the truth and as long as I'm being fair, and I think I do both.
Yeah, and the other thing you did that I remember thinking, wow, I've never heard this done, and obviously it was early on, but you would take on a Bernie Miklasz or you would take on a Randy Carricker because you didn't see media on media, I don't want to call it crime, but basically just saying, these guys aren't, Bernie's just bloviating, and I like Bernie sometimes. Bernie sometimes says things that I kind of question because he didn't say the same thing last weekend, but I thought that was interesting that's what you did, because it feels like, from what I saw, media people just kind of want to be friends, and hey, he's my friend. You had no interest in being friendly with people if you didn't agree.
No, I have no interest in being friendly with players or managers or management. They're not my friends. I have a job to do, and I have to be fair and open-minded about them. If you're friends with them, you'll never be open-minded. You'll just give the company line, which is what the media does in this town. And that's why I went after those guys on the air, because they were part of what was wrong with this town. They were nothing and still aren't. They're nothing but ass kissers. That's what they do now. And they do it for a living. When you listen to anything on the FM station, it's nothing but ass kissing of the local teams. And it's the same with the play-by-play. The Cardinals and the Blues have now, and many teams around the country are the same, but they've turned the job of a play-by-play announcer into a guy who just has to kiss their ass or he's done. And so if you want that job, you've got to be good at ass kissing, because they won't stand honesty. Tim Clark is one of the most honest broadcasters I've heard around the country. Other teams have some, but the Cardinals aren't alone in destroying that job. They've made it such a worthless job to the point where they think anybody can do it. And so they put people on with zero training, zero experience, and zero talent.
You had this interesting relationship with Kurt Warner. I was always interested. You loved Kurt Warner. Tell me a little bit about how you became such a fan of his. I know everyone in this town was, but we always thought of you kind of bucking the trend. But who couldn't love Kurt Warner, right? I mean, even when he was injured, you sort of defended him, which was kind of an interesting take for you, because sometimes I thought I'd had enough with Kurt Warner, but you pretty much defended him all the time.
Well, I defended him when he was injured because he was injured. And people were trying to run him out of town and acting as though somehow he couldn't play anymore. I knew he could, and I said so. And I said it'll be a mistake to let him go, and it was. As it turned out, he then took the Arizona Cardinals, to the Super Bowl. So it was a terrible mistake in judgment, and it all came from Mike Martz. And the media, of course, was the same way. The media flows the way the general public flows, or the way the teams want them to say it. So they all turned against Kurt Warner. The same guy who had done more for this community and had succeeded on a spectacular level, was one of the greatest rags to riches stories ever. Now all of a sudden should be gone, and he can't play anymore, and who cares? And that's how they acted toward him. But that's because the team acted that way toward him. And that's what the media does. They follow the team's lead. So they're just a PR extension of the team. And as far as I was concerned, there was nothing about Kurt Warner that wasn't the same, except that he was injured. And that proved to be true. You don't just lose your talent, overnight. There's a reason for his inability to hold the football. It's because he had a broken hand and a broken thumb.
You had to enjoy Mike Martz's tenure as a coach here, I'm guessing.
Well, I actually did like him until the last year or so. The year that he released Kurt, I know it infuriated John Shaw and Jay Sigmund, because they went to him and they said, all right, if you're going to release Kurt, we've got to do it before the March deadline, where he is due a $6 million roster bonus. He said, no, I'm going to keep him. So they kept him, paid him a $6 million roster bonus, and then March released him. And they were infuriated by him. And he became so arrogant. In his early days, he was fine. I loved him. But he became so arrogant, and no one could question him. He was a mad genius in his mind, and he became insufferable.
Yeah, it was hard to watch at the end. Couple more minutes here with the King. Can I get a carpe diem, Kevin, real quick while we're here?
Carpe diem.
Thank you. So the Blues, I have a lot of friends of mine who are a little younger than me who haven't seen all the heartbreak that I've seen. And I came up with this theory that, the older you get, you see more losing, you see more losses, you see more terrible losses. And some of my friends did not see that early 90s stuff with the Blues when you thought they were going to be great. So I'm just kind of hardened by what any sort of 12-game win streak or any sort of here they come or this is the best team they've had. Your thoughts on the Blues, and are they cursed? I know it sounds stupid to say, but boy, it feels that way.
It's not cursed so much as it is horrific management decisions. The team ownership doesn't have the wherewithal financially to get players to make a difference, really. And then when they do spend some money on a player, it's usually wasted on a bad player. And so it's been the decisions, mostly of Doug Armstrong, that have turned this team into a basic team that really doesn't excite you. They go on this 11-game winning streak, and that's exciting. But, let's see what they do the rest of the way, because we saw what they did for the first half plus of the season, and it was horrific. The move to Binnington in goal was one that Ruby made, and that was a smart move. He coached that kid at Peoria, and it bucked Doug Armstrong. And Armstrong had, apparently for some insane reason, reserved the vet for Jake Allen. I don't know how you do that. There's a guy who's been given chance after chance after chance and has proven himself to be incapable. So Binnington has made all the difference, and it allows the defensemen to be less concerned about staying back. They can get into the offensive part of the game. And so now things clicked a little bit. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. But the Blues have been a 15-plus year nightmare in terms of winning a championship. They've been in the finals early in their existence, but they haven't been in the finals in a long, long time since the 60s.
Yeah, it gets really monotonous when they do the same thing over and over each year. So we started this by talking about you being on 1190. There's always, it seems like Dan Caesar calls you maybe once every month and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" So I feel like I have to ask. You're at 1190 now. Any thoughts of going back to sports, or is it, hey, I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing right now?
Well, I do sports and politics, so I still do sports, but I would never go back to just sports now. I would never do just that. It's just, there's not enough. How many days in a row can you talk about the Cardinals or the Blues? We have pretty bad teams in this region, if you haven't noticed. Missouri's terrible in basketball. They're mediocre at best in football. Illinois is terrible in both. SA's Carbondale's basketball program is not done. Its program isn't worth a darn. So we used to get 4 teams, local teams in the NCAA tournament. We're not going to get any. So it's not something that I would ever look to do, is to go back to sports only. It becomes too redundant. And when I can cover politics as well, there's a lot going on there, and there will be a lot going on there. It's not going to stop. And I can still cover sports as well. So it's the best of both worlds for me.
You did sort of kind of hit on something. I just remember the 90s being sort of depressing because the Cardinals weren't good. We didn't have football, and the Blues were good, but never would break through. The 2000 year when they were the best sports city and they were on the front of Sports Illustrated kind of was the peak, and now we're kind of back. And now we're even talking about this better together thing. I was just curious your thoughts on just how sports are kind of in a rough area, but some people even thinking better together could help that. I'd like to get your take on it.
It would help the sports scene at all. It's one of the dumbest ideas that politicians have ever concocted. And it's to enrich themselves and empower themselves, of course. Since I don't live in St. Louis County or St. Louis City, I shouldn't have a vote. But I do have a vote if I want to cast it. I will not, because it's none of my business. But to allow this to go to a statewide referendum is the most absurd thing I've ever seen. And it's done for one reason, in order for it to pass, because it won't pass otherwise. But why should someone in Springfield or Cape Girardeau or Rolla have anything to say about St. Louis County? We shouldn't have anything to say about their towns or their cities. We shouldn't have anything to say about Kansas City. So it's one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, and it's concocted by lazy politicians, incompetent people like Cruising in the city, Stanger in the county. So people who live in St. Louis County are going to vote resoundingly against it. Yeah. But why? And why wouldn't they? Who wants to bail out the city? The city created its own mess. Get out of your mess on your own.
It's one of the reasons why I moved out of the city was the problems. I don't think I want them following me, right?
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't either.
Yeah, and I was talking about how sports was more fun. I remember, and I have to ask you because it's on my list. Sports Plus was so much fun. You changed the way that show was when they started the pit, and there was a memorable night with you and Randy Carricker. Is there anything? I can't remember what the problem was, but there definitely was a point where you guys kind of got after each other. Can you tell me a little bit about that night, that Sunday night at Mike Bush's the pit?
Well, he made an insulting comment to me, and I didn't take it kindly. And I remember Norm Stewart telling me after the show, telling me that he and his wife were watching it. And Norm said, I was telling Virginia, watch Virginia. Kevin's going to go right over the table after him. Just watch. Keep watching. And, of course, that didn't happen. But in the aftermath, I told him if he ever said anything like that again, he would have to answer to me, and it wouldn't be fun for him. And so that was the end of I told them that show that with Bush, I didn't want to come on with him anyway. And even when Frank took it over, I did it a few times just for Frank because we're friends. But I told Frank, too, that from now on, I'm not going to do it. This was a good 8 years ago, 10 years ago maybe, unless they paid me. It was, why should I drive down to their studio, give them good TV content, and they're not paying anything? So that was the end of it for me. That's pretty much the end of it. I don't even know if they still have that show.
I don't either. And that is also sad to me because those were kind of must-see shows. And like I said, when you were on it, you and Bernie and Randy, you guys would get going, and that's what guys do. They like to argue about sports, and that's part of the fun of the whole thing. I think, right? Or I don't. It feels.
Yeah, well, it is. I think it's you sit in a bar and talk to your buddies about sports, and it gets to that point, and unless people are fools, and those guys were fools. They never did their homework. They didn't know what they were talking about. And so it was. I wasn't going to sit there and listen to that crap, and without saying the truth. They don't like the truth. That's the biggest problem with people in the media. They don't want to hear the truth.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid they'll lose their tickets, or they're buddies with somebody, some player, or whatever, so they can go around and tell people they're buddies.
Kevin, it's been a real pleasure today. It's always entertaining to hear you talk. I always enjoy your take. And again, one more time, just let people know, 1190 a.m. in St. Louis. It's from 7 to 9. And then how can I podcast that? Because that has been the one thing. I'm like, how do I hear this when I want to hear it on my time?
Yes, it's Slaten.tk. Slaten.tk is the podcast site. All you have to do is go there and you have all the shows.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. How about one more Carpe Diem before we head?
Carpe Diem as we go out.
I enjoyed that chat with Kevin Slaten. Hopefully you did too. Always enjoy hearing his take on the sports world, current and previously. Always enjoy hearing him kind of taking down the man. Reminded me of my childhood, so I enjoyed talking to Kevin. And you can, like I said, listen to him on 1190 a.m., and he's still offering up hot takes every morning. It's fun. If you can flip over and get 10 minutes in, it's always fun to hear. Kevin Slaten, and that reminds me to tell you to check out my sponsor of this show, stlmasses.com. 5 locations in St. Louis. Right there at stlmasses.com, you can look up their menus. You can find their locations, big portions. Fun place to go. Saturday night, it's cold and rainy. We're going to Masses, I think. That's where we're going. It's beautiful inside there. Always fun. Good bartenders, lovely waitresses. STLmasses.com. As always, check out my YouTube channel, ST Weekly, Sports Talk Weekly, the former show. I condensed it to ST Weekly, so go to youtube.com/ST Weekly. Subscribe. Cardinal content going up every day during the season, so hopefully you will be looking at that, and you can follow the show on Twitter, Brad Straubinger. You can follow it on Facebook at Here's the Pitch with Brad, and I have a website, here'sthepitch.com. Here's-the-pitch.com. So that's all the fun places you can find me. Looking for advertisers in 2019. Hopefully you'd be interested. Just let me know through those avenues. But that's going to do it for today's show. That's Here's the Pitch. I thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.